Our two speakers to the front, Dr. Ora and Dr. Naresh. In the event title, we asked the question, how can we bring more wisdom into our political and economic systems? It's a simple question, but also a hard question. And so that's the overarching question that I place to both of you, Ora and Naresh. And maybe we could start with some opening remarks. Ora, maybe I'll start with you on your vision of authentic public policy and how you see answering this question through this framing.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Dev. First of all, thank you for organizing this, and thank you everyone for coming. I've been working as an academic in a university for over, about 20 years now. And only in the past, I say 5 years, that I started to realize how, because of my own personal transformation journey, that I had many personas that I needed to say goodbye to, or just realize that they're there. And so through my personal transformation journey, I have on this journey still trying to feel and be my authentic self. And so through that journey, I have now realized how it's actually possible to take this process to groups of people that are decision makers and that are designers of policies. Therefore, the idea of the authentic self is the same idea as authentic public policy. So it's public policy that comes from the heart, that is based on the values of love, compassion, and interconnectedness. So I'll pause there as the introduction of what I mean by authentic public policy.
And I'll turn to you, Naresh, to introduce complexity science and applied spirituality and how this shapes your work.
Right. So thanks a lot, Dave. Maybe if I stand, you can see me better. So, first of all, what is the problem we are trying to address in our work? And the problem we are trying to address is a bunch of wicked policy problems around the world. So this word wicked doesn't mean evil in this context. Wicked policy problems are those problems that have no single cause and no single solution. So when you start to solve or attempt to solve one aspect of it, another aspect gets worse. So it's like a multi-headed hydra. You chop off one head and two other heads come up. So that's one thing we are trying to address, wicked policy problems. But the idea of wicked started since 1973. It has been around for a long time. So let's jump to 2010 and later. There are two new words in the vocabulary. One is polycrisis, and the other one is meta-crisis. So the word polycrisis simply means that we have a whole range of crises, climate change and species extinction and economic inequality, and it goes on like that, social exclusion and so on. What is happening now, because of the interconnection of all of these, they are interacting to produce emergent crises. So we are getting a crisis that is kind of emerging from the interlinkages among those, and we call that the polycrisis. That is external to us, or we think it is outside of us. What is inside of us is also in crisis. So we have what one might call a fragmented consciousness. It is resulting in mental health issues and a whole range of other sort of inner challenges, and that we are calling the meta-crisis. So we have that in education and so on. So that's what we are trying to address. So our work, how are we addressing it? We are looking at complexity sciences. All I mean is, see, complex is not complicated. Let me make that clear up front. Complex is when you have many variables, many actors all interacting together. So you cannot predict what will happen. So you have a whole bunch of unpredictable stuff happening. And we call that a complex system. Complicated is like sending a rocket to the moon. Very complicated, but we can draw blueprints. We can make a manual. We can send that to the moon. But bringing up a child is complex. Because you have one child, you can't write a manual for the next child. The child has a mind of its own. It's growing, it's changing, reacting to its environment, and its own genetic blueprint, constant evolution. That is what we mean by complex. But in our work, we also work with quantum-like frameworks. So we draw from quantum physics because quantum theory is the best explanation of physical reality that we have today. Complexity theory is the best explanation we have for social and economic phenomena that we have today. So we draw from these two fields of science and connect it as well to cognitive theories and neuroscience. So we get to the inside. Right. So we bring that together. But how do we deal with this malaise that is inside, this meta-crisis? So we ask the question, who am I? We need to understand first our own true nature. And that's when you apply that understanding, we call it applied spirituality. It has nothing to do with religion. It is the human experience of their own nature, of their own reality. And that we call, when we apply it to public policy, we call it applied spirituality. So we have drawn from all of the world's major traditions. You know, we have gone to the mystical core of Christianity, of Islam, but beyond the Gospels, we have gone to the mystical core. Same for Islam through Sufism, same for Hinduism through Advaita Vedanta, same for Buddhism, Taoism, and so on. And we collected that wisdom at the mystical core, and then the applications of that, we call it applied spirituality. That's how we get this big complex thing. Now, what does it produce at the end? So we produce three things, or we call them some different names. They are very close. One we are calling enlightened public policy. And we hope that that will have some impact on policymakers. The next one is integral public policy, bringing all these little pieces together. And the third one is wise policy making. And I think we will want to talk about wisdom more. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you so much. That was a really nice opener to give us the framing. So we heard enlightened public policy, wise public policy, and what was the third one? Integral public policy.
All of that is
so
authentic.
I'll move back to Ora to capture this in the authentic public policy and how you are bringing this into practice here in Thailand and the work that you do.
Okay. Yes, so actually my colleague that I should acknowledge is here, Best. And he's been with me since we started the School of Public Policy. And we as a team have experimented with different processes for deliberation. As we all know, if a group of us are going to come together to decide on a program or a policy, that decision-making process requires deliberation. And that deliberation process could be done through stale, very uptight, formal settings, or it could be done in a way that acknowledges our human nature, that has different personas, different characters, mixed motivations, the values that we have within ourselves at any one time is constantly probably shifting and changing, and also the traumas, the past experiences, the myths, the narratives that we carry within ourselves, either consciously or unconsciously. So it's very important for us now, in any deliberative process for policy making, we would talk to the peers that we're working with or the collaborators, let's say the ministry. We held a workshop with the Climate Change Bureau, which is under the Ministry of Natural Resource Management of Thailand. And they are heavily focused on the engineering aspect of climate change, which is how to lower carbon emissions, for example. And so they're busy counting the carbon that is emitted. So we engage with them in a process where we first work with them to go into themselves, to reflect of who they are and what are their motivations, create that safe space for people to be vulnerable in such a way that does not impede and go too deep into losing the track of why we're here, but at the same time open enough space so that the real character and the real self comes out. So again, it's through authentic processes such as self-reflection. We would have the participants do forest bathing, sit in silence, talk to trees. We sit around campfire, drink cocoa. We have them do role play in a way that it's not pretending to be an element in nature, but just embody it, like just open and feel with your body. So switch off your rational sort of cognitive thought that's quite loud to just try to feel that connection of you and nature. And then we would have the discussion based on that element that you're embodying, for example. So I'm sharing these concrete processes with you. It's really an experiential process that is, you need to go through it. Or I'm sure many of us here might have tried something as well. And so once you've gone through it, and then we can kind of tap into that space within ourselves to be most authentic, then the policy that we design is more inclusive, longer term. The word interest becomes so complex. It's not just the short-term interest for sure. So just to give you the conclusion of that experiment with the Climate Change Bureau, we ended up having the design of different programs that reflects the more spiritually based climate action. So that would include, for example, the idea of Soul City, SOUL, where people in the city can truly be connected and be related as souls, and the shared souls. And so creating space for such soul city, I think would be like today, like this space where the souls all come together. Meaning, what does it mean? It means that the city would contribute to or support policies that support spaces like this, rather than entertainment complex or big shopping malls, or even other types of spaces that does not allow souls to connect, for example. So this is an example of what I call policy with spirituality, as opposed to policies for spiritual health. Because policies for spiritual health would be supporting meditation centers, yoga centers, maybe libraries or some things, but that's kind of a place-based and is specific for the spiritual health sector, which is good as well to support. However, if you put spirituality into the DNA of public policies, whether it's on climate change, education, foreign affairs, all the sectors, if you put spirituality into the DNA, then the way you view the ultimate goal of the policy would change. So we did that experiment with the Climate Change Bureau, which was quite successful, and now they have actually convinced that their participatory process has to be much deeper, and it doesn't need to be expensive, it just needs to be authentic. Yeah, so that's one example. I have several other examples to share, but I'll pause here so Naresh can also jump in here.
Nourish, I don't know if you want to add specifically to that, but it's beautiful to hear this example of soul cities. And, smart city has been such a trending, policy for many years, and I think it's very refreshing to see that. I noticed both of you are bridge builders, and I think you just shared this experience, which is a very bridge building experience, right? You're sitting with the establishment, as it will, and bringing in spirituality, not through concepts, but through embodied practices. Naresh, maybe you can share a little bit on your experience as a bridge builder. What's changed over time? How has this bridge building experience been for you? And how do you use maybe frameworks or indicators that you mentioned these three types of public policy, you mentioned complexity science as well. What are maybe some of the indicators or frameworks that could be used by the old system towards becoming something fresh and new?
Right, so I really like what Ora is doing. Complements the kind of work that we are doing, but we take a slightly different approach. I should tell you that I spent 30 years in the policy field, working at the level of ministers of government, as a Director General in the federal government of Canada, as the UNDP in New York, Principal Advisor on Poverty, working in about 65 or 70 countries around the world. And that kind of bridge building that I was doing then was between governments and civil society actors. I was building bridges between the corporate sector and the public sector to try to get more effective policy. After 30 years, and then reflecting on where the world was, I felt like I was a failure, like we had not made significant progress. Just take climate change alone. I mean, we went to Paris as a world community, we made commitments, and we are not keeping them. And so I thought that a different bridge needed to be built. And that bridge was the bridge between the head and the heart. Put it that way. Someone said that the longest distance in the world is the distance between the heart and the head. So the way the head works, because we've all been taught that, we are taught in something called rationality. So we must think rationally, we must do critical thinking. At school we are rewarded for this. So we do axiomatic rationality, and you get high marks if you are a rational thinker. Rational thinking works well for bridges, concrete bridges and wooden bridges, not social bridges. And the kind of bridge that we are talking about now is to build a bridge between the rational process, the so-called rational process, which is in fact is highly limited because it's linear, it's deterministic, it's reductionist, and it makes all these crazy, naive assumptions of neoclassical economics. Because see, neoclassical economics has nothing to do with the real world. It makes a bunch of simplifying assumptions, and that would be all good for academics, right? Excepting that economists, and with due respect to all present company here who are economists, policymakers take economists on their word as though they knew what they were talking about. But what they study is an artificial system simplified by a bunch of assumptions. If you don't believe me, read the book by George DeMartino called Economics, the Tragic Science. Why economists do harm even when they try to do good. That's not me. He's a professor of economics at the University of Denver. So take a look at that book. He lays out the arguments really well. So, but we can't throw away the baby with the bathwater, because the world is stuck in that paradigm. we have to bring them along across the bridge. And we have to bring that human science back into bearing. And that's the kind of bridge that we have to build. When we talk about wisdom, what are we really talking about? So when I teach this course to my students on applied spirituality, and we have to talk about wisdom, we start with data. You say, all right, evidence-based policy. Everybody says we must have that kind of policy. Sounds good, right? But what is the evidence composed of? It has data, and data can be transformed into information, and information gets transformed to knowledge, and then hopefully knowledge should get transformed to wisdom. So we have a little spectrum, right? From data to knowledge from data to information to knowledge to wisdom. When you look at evidence-based policy in today's world, you find a large amount of data. It is so big, they call it big data. Did you know, right? But then as you go down the spectrum to wisdom, about zero. Why? Because we have a widening context and the need for deeper understanding in order to get to wisdom. So that's where the bridges need to be built. That's what we are trying to do. The limitation of our work at this point of time is that it is quite conceptual, but we think we need to crack the existing paradigm by deep conceptual work before we go into the practice. But we are getting there, and I will share that with you as we move on. But let me not hug it. I don't want to hug the floor with Ora near to me, and she's doing all this wonderful stuff here in Chiang Mai.
Yeah, please share more, especially around, I think maybe the code you might have cracked is with nature and the environment. It's the one crisis that seems to unite us all as a planet. And also it's something that can you bring in through embodied practices as well. Maybe you want to share a little bit about the bridge building experience around environment and nature and the Nature's Wisdom Council that you've been building out as well.
Okay, thanks, Steph. I'll just speak from my own experience that, up until recently, say 5 years ago, I thought I was different from nature. I just lived in a dual world, right, of fragmentation, of not knowing not even knowing, right? And then once this crack, of oh, holy shit, kind of like, wow. And then you start to realize, oh, there's the air I breathe, and that's me and nature. And oh, let's, my husband is also here, cute, pointing to people as I speak. Take off our shoes and stand on the grass and just feel it, right? Or just stand up straight in the middle of the night, look up into the stars, and let the universe kind of connect you, from your top of your head down to your feet, down all the way to the core of the earth. All of those practices, which I went through just so to get to the peace inside of me, or to build the peace inside of me, right? So by having glimpses of that clarity, allowed me to make better choices. So my terminology now is holistic rationality. So if I'm just rational in kind of like the litany space of, okay, calculative, and do cost-benefit analysis of my choices, but I'm not tapping into my intuition, everything else around me that's telling me what's good for me, then that's just rational in the sort of, I would say, superficial sense. So I still like the word rational, has to be holistic rational. So my point is, once we can create such spaces for people to be in that mode more often than not, I don't think we can all be in that mode all the time, but always be able to come back just through every breath that we take, and then therefore that can connect us to reality, the truth, that we are nature. We are that tree, we are that river. We are, I think Dev went through a short workshop that I led, and he was a rock. And every day when I have a favorite song, Thai song that I share with Dev, it's about a guy who thinks of himself as a rock, looking at a beautiful star that he can never reach because he's just a rock, cannot move. So
It's a great song, actually.
it's a great song. So, you know, in our work, as I shared, we've done several of these experiments, and so far it's worked, because if we just allow people to, I mean, the phrase that I use is from human doing to human being, and when you're real, that's when the authenticity of connection happens. That can help you or help the collective make a decision based on clarity, as opposed to craving or any other sort of drive that is not coming, and this is my husband's word, not coming from joy. You know, anything that's coming from fear, from just being afraid that you will be ostracized, or that we will be killed, or out of hatred, all that is normal that we can have. I think we have to navigate it and not allow it to lead in the process of us having to make hard decisions, especially for public policy. I mean, easy for me to say, the irony, or the paradox, irony, I don't know what the right word would be, is that many people who make it to the level of policy making and making decisions for the wide collective, many people who make it up there are actually people who have some sort of distorted drive to prove themselves, to be seen, to maybe to overly rescue everyone, or maybe overly protect something or a group, or so that drive, if it's imbalanced, then it leads to, I think, what we see today of the unnecessary use of force, for instance, or the unnecessary need to collect and accumulate so much wealth, for example. So I can go on and on, but that's kind of the gist that I'm trying to get at, which is that creating that space for people to be as clear and calm as possible when deciding together on policies.
Naresh, you would like to add to that? I know you had left your last point as well in terms of how you're developing your approach and working through education. I think you also work with a lot of young people, helping perhaps them at a very early stage before they even get into their career and make those kinds of, seeking, searching, recognition, life choices, and finally realize, but how do we work with them at a much earlier age? I also want to note is we do have space for questions. So I know we have a lot of people here, and all of you will have very interesting questions. So perhaps in about 5 to 6 minutes, if you have questions, start thinking about them, and we'll open the floor for your questions as well as we continue the conversation.
So what Ora has just shared is the same challenge that we work with, although in a slightly different way. So the source of the problem, as she was saying, is separation. So we think of ourselves as separate from each other, and collectively as humans as separate from nature. That separation is an illusion. But how do you recognize that illusion and get out of it? That is the source of the fragmentation. So the source of the separation, of course, comes from hundreds of years of conditioning and the powerful science of Newton, Descartes, and Bacon, which we now use in our rational world. That's one source. But we are also taught by our parents and our teachers that you will be rewarded in the society if you behave and act in a certain way, a rational way. That encourages and fosters this segregation. So in our view, getting out of this mindset of the separation of humans from nature will require a lot of work. So we try to work at two levels. One with policymakers themselves and different sets of policymakers. And in India, we are working with the Indian Institute of Public Administration because they train all the senior public servants in the country. But one of their professors told me, Naresh, you're wasting time. These people cannot change. They are a lost generation. And I take that seriously. Maybe he's right. He said, why don't you work with schools? Maybe that's the only possibility now. So we have developed a curriculum in which we are teaching teachers how they might teach differently, not assuming fragmentation and separation anymore. So we show where these are happening, and then we say, all right, if you're teaching commerce or physics or biology or art, how do you address the inherent separation assumptions that you are making in your subject? So we have created curricula to train the trainer from kindergarten to grade 12. And then we are already teaching postgraduate level, linking public policy for sustainable development with applied spirituality, again getting out of the separation. We have training programs which directly address the issue of the ego. And that is a really important and big issue. And my plan is to draw more and more from established spiritual teachers who have credibility. I'm a professor of public policy, so I don't claim to be any guru or public, any teacher of spirituality. I walk my own journey, I do my own meditation in order to get rid of the separation within me. That alone is a big challenge. But we do this training, and now we have developed two curricula, one for Bachelors of Business Administration and one for the Masters of Business Administration. Because public policy is really important on one hand, but on the other, if the corporate sector doesn't shift, then we are not likely to get anywhere. So we are now thinking of something like Oxford does. Oxford got a successful business executive, Paul Coleman, who was the head of Unilever. He has bought into these ideas, and he's running a program called Imagine at Oxford, and it's called the Oxford Experience. At Jindal, where I teach, we are now going to hopefully deliver something we will call the Jindal Experience for Asian corporate and public sector leaders and bring them together. And we will have all of this stuff, getting rid of the ego, or not getting rid of the ego, recognizing the ego at work. Killing the ego is probably not a very smart thing, because you will get destroyed yourself if your ego is very strong, like mine was. You go through the night of the dark night of the soul, as somebody called it. It can be quite painful. But if you recognize that the ego is at work and work with it, might be a more friendly way. So getting out of that is what we are trying to do now with the education curricula that we are developing. I have a PhD student now working, or I shouldn't say I, but me, because Ora is one of the advisors on the supervisory team for this PhD student, who is working on applied spirituality and water policy in Maharashtra in India. And you're from Mumbai, so you will be interested in that. So it is getting out there now. We are publishing. We have just put out a book a year ago called Applied Spirituality and Sustainable Development Policy. We are working on another one is coming out next month. In August, a little delay. It's using all the global philosophies to redefine AI ethics. So what do we do about AI? And I know we have digital nomads.
Well, actually, that was a question I wanted to get to both of you before we move into questions, which was the AI question.
Okay, let me just one last line on that and then move on. I just wanted to mention that we are now working on another book, hopefully it will come out in 2026, and we are sort of saying, okay, after the SDGs wrap up in 2030, what happens next? So we all know we're not going to accomplish the SDGs, but at least we're going to learn some lessons. How do we package that? How do we make a fundamental transformation that builds these bridges at the policy level, at the UN level, and so on? And Ora is going to fix it at the grassroots level.
We're counting on both of you to infuse all these papers and books into consciousness.
So next.
Yeah, I think if there are questions here, you can start getting prepared. I'll move to you next. We'll probably take a few questions together, but I wanted to bring the AI question because it's one of those questions that really brings us to the core of who we are. This question of intelligence, you mentioned like this rational mind being rewarded. And my work in technology, we've seen that technology reflects the values that we put into it in terms of both how we design it, and I think AI reflects that more than any other digital technology we've built. Given that these AI systems are built on data, which is itself created on ontologies, on this different paradigm, on this separate self, on this world built on largely on egos, on self-interest, without the wisdom and without the connection to heart. What might be the risk that you see of AI built on this system, and how do we reimagine? How will you think of this AI question from a new ethical framework informed by these new ontologies, these Asian philosophies that you're doing work on?
I think that's for you,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah. So quickly on AI, two big things. One is that most of what we are using, generative AI mainly. Gen AI, as we all know, is trained on, as you said, on large language models. So they scrape the internet and they pick up all the literature we have. So the Russians, I understand, are already having this English language publishing. They are dominating the web space with their ideas, so that when you go to ChatGPT or Claude or whichever is your favorite Gen AI algorithm or source, whether it be Google, Bard, or whoever, when they scrape the internet, they will pick up that literature. And so they will generate answers that way. We have to take that on board as well. And so we have to populate the literature with enough of this thinking.
More doing.
More doing, right. Well, a lot of writing is required so that the machines, the algorithms will pick this up. That's one thing. The other thing, what we did was we looked at 80 existing ethical AI statements. All of them make Western economic and philosophical assumptions. Economic meaning, as I was explaining earlier, individualism, GDP per capita is the measure of progress, and it goes on and on and on. And then the philosophical assumptions, about human life and the way society is, and that progress is linear, and all of that. So we said, but wait a minute, are there no other philosophical systems from which you can get ethical insights? So what about Ubuntu in Africa? And what about indigenous people's philosophical systems? And what about Buddhism? And what about Advaita Vedanta? And what about, even Christian, getting to the mystical core of Christianity, not the Gospels and the Abrahamic religions per se, which have a certain closeness to the Western assumptions. And so we looked at that, and we have put out a book which is coming out from Routledge in August called Global Philosophies for AI Ethics, in which hopefully policymakers can now draw from a much wider range. Even the European Union, that is most advanced, they have an EU law on AI. The Americans are laissez-faire, as normally they are on economics. So they are sort of leaving it to the private sector, just as they left the Boeing 737 MAX to be, quality control to be done by the manufacturer themselves. But we don't want that kind of thing to continue. So that's what we have to do. AI ethical statements must come from more than just Western philosophical and economic assumptions. That's one thing, and we have to populate the literature with how do we bridge the rational approach compared to the human approach.
So you've heard that, everyone get writing, get interesting. Great, I think we'll move to some questions, or do you want to add something?
Oh yeah, I think so. You clearly have thought about it more because you have, putting together a book. For me, it's from my own observation through our. Basically, we had a winter school with the International Public Policy Association, and the topic was AI and public policy analysis. And what I got from there and from my own observation is basically the world is going into two directions, right? Of people using AI just to quickly replicate or to get answers, and like speeches, for example, or songs or essays of students. I mean, we know all of that, and then it becomes, I don't know, the world that direction will probably be a lot of junk. Whereas the world in this direction are those who are, I think, using the AI in a way that helps them to continue to transform. So assisting us, right? And I don't know if this is true, but the limit of AI is the limit of human, cognitive knowledge. So anything beyond cognition, like this experiential, is something that only us can feel, and then the AI can learn cognitively from what we've experienced. So in a way, again, it's a smart way of assisting.
So it was leaning into what makes you human versus what AIs bring and what's different. I think we have a question here. So we'll take 2 or 3 questions together. We'll take 3 questions together for time. So just state your name and what the bridge builder or whatever tag that you've chosen. And then state your question.
Well, thanks for your talk. I'm Will. I'm a cosmo-local entrepreneur. Apparently, I learned that today. So you guys talked about applied spirituality and holistic rationality, cosmo-localism. I'm curious, let's fast forward 10 years, and this goes really well. These ideas catch on, and people put this into practice. Could you paint a picture of what a 10-year future scenario looks like? So like 2035, if this goes really well, what are the concrete, specific changes we'll see maybe from technology standpoint, governance standpoint, commercial standpoint, but what does this look like when success happens?
One more question, and then you want to ask now? Yeah.
Okay. One question to Ora. You said you worked in this climate change department at the ministry. Can you give an example of what you think has been different, like any policy decision or announcements from the department? And then a question to both of you. We are all kind of like interested in the topic. I'm a bridge builder as well. How do we create the bridge to those that are not interested in this yet? For example, the normal corporate that is in a performance-led model to optimize in their current system. So how do we, like when you use the word spirituality, for example, that's probably a turn-off for many executives. So what do we do to connect to them, right? Thank you.
You can do the responses.
Okay, tough questions. Before the 10-year future, let me give you the concrete policy that I'm seeing right after our workshop is the forest bathing activity. So forest bathing activity is known in Japan, for example, and it's now being linked to the idea of social prescription. So when you are, let's say, a little bit down, depressed, instead of getting some medication to help you go through the depression, we can prescribe social prescription of forest bathing, and then you go walk in the forest for 3 days, for example, and help you to connect to nature, which naturally helps you feel better. Scientifically, we know that. So this policy is being considered as part of preserving the forest. So the community-based forestry, they're looking for activities of, there's in Chiang Mai and in Thailand, there's gazillion community forests. And so the communities are looking at activities that would both have them get some income and also help preserve nature. So forest bathing, I think if it becomes that policy that is accepted and by the Ministry of Health as well as the community members and the Ministry of Forestry, then I think that's a little concrete, tangible policy that we can see how the idea of applied spirituality and climate action could be put together. It's totally cosmo-local, I think, this idea. Yeah. So that's my first answer to that. The future, what this would look like in 10 years. So I think it depends on whose future. My future, I think, would be okay. Because through this process, I feel like I'm more resilient, and I could probably adapt, and I would probably know when to stop, like where I can control and where I cannot. I don't know if the world will be better. I don't think the world will be better. I think the world will be the same. But myself and at least the people that I've influenced as the director of school public policy, I think that's what I can do. So, yeah.
So I'll start with your question first. And see, the theory of change here is not the traditional theory of change, where you can predict and project, like 5-year plans, 10-year plans, 15-year plans, which is the way we use to make public policy. It's going to be emergent. It's going to happen, I believe, from the bottom up. So what will happen in 10 years, in my view, and I hope, is that we will have a large number of teachers teaching their kids differently. 1. 2, I expect a number of university graduates coming out of the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy in India and the School of Public Policy in Chiang Mai will have had a different public policy education than was ever delivered before. As those number of graduates grow, we hope that we will begin to get change in the way the analytical level works for public policy. That will own, I'm hopeful that kids will go home and ask their parents who are politicians and who are corporate leaders, why are you doing it the way you are doing it now? I am learning a different way. Why can't you try this? Maybe a few of them will come around, but not many in 10 years from now. So that's how I see the world. It will be emergent, and that's a different approach. I hope that there will be some massive shift, like a tipping point might happen that I cannot predict right now. But I'm hopeful. On the other question, perfectly right. There are 2 parts to the answer. One is the language. You are on the money on that one. The language spirituality does turn off a bunch of people. And we are already thinking of using language like awareness-based systems change. We are thinking about language such as consciousness studies rather than applied spirituality. There is a cohort, a demographic that we will lose if we don't use the word applied spirituality, but there is a cohort that we will never get if we use the applied spirituality. So we have to work with that tension. But right now, I will not even bother with those who do not want to come. I will work with champions. For right now, with the short amount of years that I have left, see my beard is already gray, I prefer to identify those who are ready to work with these ideas and strengthen their hand to move it forward.
Hi, my name is Lukáš. I'm a bridge builder, and in particular a conceptual bridge builder, since I'm a philosopher by training. And I want to ask a question that originally I envisioned to be specifically for Dr. Singh, but I think it also applies, to Ora's expertise. And that is just what is the role of models and simulations in your approach to complexity and the emergence in urban or regional settings? I'm very curious about how models and simulations can bridge, as you say, Dr. Singh, the mind or the rational part and the emotional part of the human existence.
Excellent. So in our work, we use models, ABMs, agent-based modeling, because now it allows us to assign different rules to each of the agents. So we no longer have to assume that each human being is homogeneous, is the same, like every other one, a representative human being, because there is no such thing. But that's an assumption of neoclassical economics. So it helps to take us a bit further. But all of the models used in complexity theory are themselves reductionist in nature. So there's a limitation there. We complement that by the qualitative side, or what Edgar Morin will call complex thinking. So it is how you get our thinking itself to recognize the interlinkages rather than model them alone. And when you bring them together, we do much better than the typical rational model that we've had in the past. But in addition to that, in our book that's coming out on AI and AI ethical statements, there are authors, one author from Hong Kong who has written a chapter on what she called the Buddha bot. The Buddha bot is a chapter she is writing on how a chatbot or a bot, in BOT, not BUTT, can help you to do your meditation, can help you to identify your own masks that you wear every day, and help you to make the bridge between, your rational, incentive-driven mind and the kind of holistic thinking we are talking about. So all of that is beginning to happen in terms of simulation.
Very interesting. Question? JB?
You wanted to add?
That's okay.
Or you want to add? You've got the question.
Oh no, I just want to share a interesting linkage to Naresh's answer. We have a paper out based on a futures thinking workshop. It's called From Drama to Dharma, and it talks. And in that workshop, there was this idea of the hologram Buddha. You can wear and then the Buddha comes in front of you as and when, and there's a similarity to this Hong Kong paper that you're talking about. But that was the idea of like tech, but tech that
Cosmo-local thing.
cosmo-local tech with neuroscience, with everything else that we know today scientifically, blend with Buddha image to come as and when. So there was a joke that if the Buddha hologram comes and says wise things, but then he pauses and it says click to subscribe if you want more. Just sharing a funny anecdote.
Please.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you very much for your presence and talk. My name's Jamie. I'm a bridge builder, seem to be the most generic. I'm an internal family systems therapist, and I work with Eastern and Indigenous psychedelic treatments. My question was about the linear nature of our models and our thinking, and this wonderful spectrum you illustrated from data to information, to knowledge, to wisdom. And I'm wondering how wisdom might compost back into the way we source data and how and what we choose to collect data on. Because obviously what we collect data on is pretty infinite, and presumably something about how we do it also affects the data which then feeds back into that system. So I wondered about that, and I've realised it's slightly tangential. I was also, well not tangential, linked rather, the way we use LLMs to use AI, which more and more will affect our culture, it seems that because that reflects our linear cultures and is very much based on words, it necessarily excludes so many of the contemplative wisdom traditions. And I'm hoping and wondering if there's any solution to that, perhaps even a different kind of tech that isn't linear. Thank you.
Should I?
My quick sort of reaction to your question is the act of collecting data and analyzing and getting to knowledge itself is the scientific reductionist approach. So maybe we don't need to collect data the way we've done it. Maybe the data is already there. We just need to feel it through our wisdom. I believe we all can just tap into that wisdom, actually. That's my belief. Not that I can do it all the time, but I believe innately we can. And sometimes we're just too blinded by all the data analysis and information making through this sort of scientific analytical approach that we praise so much of. So there's a kind of a balance that. So the point would be, what is data? What are we not listening to, perhaps? Maybe something like that.
That's a little bit how we frame the cosmo-local as well, in terms of go from the local mind to the cosmic mind to tap into that intelligence, right? Which doesn't need data.
So, a very practical response. We struggled with this, as you would well imagine. And the answer is stories. Stories.
Stories.
That's how you go beyond the data to get to the wisdom. And we have something that Ora knows well also called narrative policy analysis. So we teach narrative policy analysis to complement the cost-benefit analysis. Because if we did only stories, we will lose the mainstream policymaker right now. So we do the traditional cost-benefit analysis, but we bring stories in. The big task ahead of us is how do we persuade existing policymakers of the power of stories in the public policy process. And we are working on that now. The related issue is, how to begin to integrate qualitative and quantitative. So now the methodology is advancing rapidly in the mixed methods area, and that kind of methodology is being taught to all our students. They all now do not either qualitative or quantitative but mixed methods wherever it's relevant and necessary. So we begin to do that. The final thing is, what do we reward? And if we continue to reward this traditional evidence-based policy only on data, we'll get it wrong. So we are trying to persuade policymakers that incentives should be given for people who can deal with narrative policy analysis. You see, in fact, I am now persuaded, after years of being trained as a natural scientist, you might not believe that I was trained as a natural scientist. But, I am convinced that it is these stories that can really describe systems. Quantitative data is hopeless at dealing with systems. True complex systems have to be described by stories. And complexity, we were born as humans to deal with complexity. Otherwise, we would not have survived in the forest while we were evolving in the jungles. But we used stories at that time. And now we call it all kinds of strange names like behavioral economics and behavioral sciences and so on. So those stories, I think, is the answer.
So maybe I can add, since your answer is very concrete. The concrete tool that we use is personas, borrowed from the design thinking field. For example, now I'm in charge of doing the research to write the 5-year strategic plan to reduce PM 2.5 in Chiang Mai for the province. So we are producing, right now we produce 50 personas of people who are using fire or who are affected by the smog. And we're opening the participatory process for people to come up with personas that people they know or of themselves that's missing in this whole. So a collection of stories of individuals so that we could feel how this problem and then therefore the way out that would be fair to all. So it's part of our climate justice, approach as well. So specific tools, and I agree, the stories, the qualitative aspect. And without, preparing in advance, the Jindal School and the Chiang Mai School of Public Policy is very similar, taking this track. We, as a compulsory course, also have the narrative policy analysis. And we produce students who would be mixed research method researchers. And we're following the Jindal School for the first time this semester to have a course on awakening and climate change. So having people to start with the awakening process of themselves before they go into the technical stuff of climate change, for example. In fact, my graduate, one is here, Jerry, if I could highlight him. He's been, you can talk to Jerry, but he's been working on the spirituality-based leadership for Africa. And he's originally from Nigeria. We also have an alumni here, Sumyat as well, who can also tell you about our other project. Sorry to hijack advertisements.
Hi, my name is Brian. I think I chose digital nomad, but I'm not entirely sure why at this point, so we'll just go with that. My question is, I guess, a little bit, you've touched on it a little bit in terms of you think you're looking for champions, but what is the path towards overcoming the, I guess, algorithmic inertia of, like, we live in a simplified digital world where everything is, it's either one thing or it's another, based on one person's perspective, and the algorithm highlights those differences. So how do we overcome that? How do we influence the shift in that cultural dynamic that we have right now?
That's a tough one.
You want to go or me?
We'll take one more question.
Okay.
My name is Chantal, bridge builder and a development practitioner, and I'm currently focusing on decolonizing development, and a big part of that is epistemic justice. So I was curious, you touched upon in how you approach AI with integrating different epistemologies, and I was wondering, how can we go further, especially in the economic sphere where it's so dominant how we function, and really integrate these different epistemologies and also apologies, that it can be more practical and also breed the instant legitimacy they actually have.
I'll give both to you.
Yeah. Right. So
Easy job.
the answer to the first question is more or less what I've said earlier. On the algorithms themselves, I think populating the literature, where the large language models are being built, is one part of influencing that and exposing. So I would like to see ChatGPT, for example, which I use. Well, 62% of people use ChatGPT compared to Bard or Claude or all the others. That's why I say ChatGPT, but I recognize all others. So that they will answer the question and say that the binary is not consistent with reality. And more we have to make that case so that the algorithms begin to pick that up. It's already doing it. When I asked ChatGPT that, it says that the binary is an artificial construct. We can check that. So it's beginning to learn that. That's one way. The other way is the ethics. And the ethical issue really is, and this links to the question you have raised about epistemic justice. How do we know that we know? Or how do we know when we know? So we all believe that science, objective science, in which the human being subjectivity plays no role, is the only valid data. As scientists, we are trained that way. So we must do an experiment that can be reproduced by 3 other people and therefore it must have nothing to do with me. So there is this book that has just come out called The Blind Spot. And The Blind Spot is an excellent piece of work which shows that the key to reality is the human experience. It is demonstrated in quantum physics that is only when the observer observes the potential for change that it becomes real. I mean, that is really well established now. So this epistemic justice is about knowing when we know and what is valid knowledge. We had to spend quite a bit of time to show that inner knowing was valid knowledge. And we could only do that when we could publish papers in peer-reviewed social science journals who are now accepting these papers. For 2 years or so, nobody would touch it. Papers were all being rejected. Now they are being accepted. So there is change occurring, and we are moving into what is valid knowledge, including inner knowing. One of the big points I think we need to make is, there is a book called The Virtue of Ignorance. We as humans pride ourselves in a knowledge-based society. We are far more ignorant than knowledgeable. I would hazard a guess that maybe of the world out there, complexity, real world, we probably know 1%, and 99% of what's out there we do not know. We need to teach ignorance studies much more than knowledge management. Then we will get epistemic justice. You're comfortable with that?
Dinner is ready.
Oh, okay.
I've been informed faithfully. Perhaps as a final closing remarks, just maybe a quick 30 seconds from each of you. What's something that you hope that a network like a cosmo-local network could do to start to bring out this change that you described?
Well, if I might, in 30 seconds, what I really hope will happen, we have a spirituality, science and public policy network. If you can look that up, feel free to join, send in an application. I would really like to see a strong partnership between our center at the Jindal University and cosmo-local growth. That's what I'd like.
So for me, I would like us here today to honor the opportunity to connect. And there's probably a reason why you chose to come here today, and we're all meeting. And some of us might feel, oh, I feel like we know each other before. Maybe we don't actually, but maybe we have in different, dimensions or times or whatever. I think that what I can only hope is that these spaces proliferate faster so that we can help each other through, in small ways, connect, transform, and so we all become less binary, less simple, and embrace the complexity life that we have within our inner selves and also our outer selves. So that's all I can ask. And once we're comfortable with the complexity and is able to stay as much as possible in the clarity state of mind, then we can trust ourselves to make authentic decisions, not only for ourselves, for our loved ones, and for the collectives that we're responsible for. So that's what I like to say. Thank you.
Well, Naresh, Ora, you nourished our minds, you nourished our hearts.
And I think the rain is not helping to nourish.
The rain is now telling us it's time to eat. So time to nourish our bellies. So thank you again. That was really mind and heart opening. And